The rain was already coming down in sheets when my mother-in-law threw my suitcase out the front door. Thunder cracked overhead like the sky was splitting open, and the wind was strong enough that I had to brace myself against the door frame to keep from being knocked over. "Get out!" she screamed, her face twisted with rage. "You've brought nothing but bad luck to this family since the day my son married you." My husband, Derek Chen, stood behind his mother with his arms crossed, his expression cold and unmoved. Beside him was my sister-in-law, Vivian, wearing a smirk that made my blood boil even now, even knowing what I knew. "Derek," I said, trying one last time, even though I already knew it was pointless. "It's a Category 4 typhoon. The government issued mandatory evacuation orders. You can't seriously be throwing me out in this weather." "You heard my mother," Derek said, his voice flat. "Pack your things and leave. We don't want you here anymore." In my previous life, I had begged. I had cried and pleaded, gotten down on my knees in the pouring rain and begged them to let me stay. I had reminded them that we were legally married, that I had nowhere else to go, that the storm was deadly. They had laughed at me. Vivian had recorded it on her phone and posted it online with the caption, "Gold digger gets what she deserves." I had spent 3 days huddled in a public shelter, terrified and alone, while my husband and his family rode out the storm in comfort. And then, 2 days after the typhoon passed, I had learned the truth that would haunt me until the day I died. But that was my previous life. This time, I knew exactly what was coming, and I was going to make sure they got everything they deserved. "Fine," I said calmly, picking up my suitcase. "I'll go." My mother-in-law blinked, clearly surprised that I wasn't fighting back. Derek's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Just like that?" Vivian said. "No tears, no begging?" "Just like that," I confirmed. "You're right. I don't belong here. I never did." I walked out into the storm without looking back, letting the rain soak through my clothes in seconds. Behind me, I heard the door slam shut and the deadbolt click into place. I permitted myself a small smile as I headed toward my car. They had no idea what was about to happen to that house. No idea what the next 48 hours would bring. But I did. My name is Nina Zhao, and I died at 28 in the aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan, which devastated the coastal city of Qingdao in August 2023. When I woke up 6 months earlier, on a bright February morning in 2023, I thought I was losing my mind. But the calendar on my phone confirmed it. I had been given an impossible second chance. I had been reborn. In my first life, I had married Derek Chen at 25, believing I had found my soulmate. We had met at a corporate event where I worked as a marketing coordinator for a tech startup, and Derek worked in his family's real estate development company. He had been charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in me rather than just my appearance. What I didn't realize until much later was that Derek's interest in me had nothing to do with love and everything to do with maintaining his image as a successful, settled family man while he pursued other women behind my back. His family had been against our marriage from the start. Derek's mother, Margaret Chen, came from old money and believed I was a social climber trying to marry above my station. His younger sister, Vivian, was jealous of any attention Derek gave to anyone other than her. And his father, Thomas Chen, was too busy building his real estate empire to care about his son's personal life. I had spent 3 years trying to win their approval, working extra jobs to contribute financially to the household, doing all the cooking and cleaning even though we could afford help, and enduring countless insults and humiliations, all because I believed that love conquered all, that eventually they would see how much I cared for Derek. I was a fool. The truth came out 2 days after the typhoon, when I returned from the shelter to find the house remarkably intact. No flooding, minimal damage, almost as if the storm had passed it by entirely. I had been so relieved, so grateful that at least I still had a home to return to. That's when I overheard Derek on the phone in his study. "No, the storm barely touched us," he was saying to someone. "The weatherproofing and elevation we added last year worked perfectly. Not a drop of water inside. Yeah, I know. Poor Nina spent 3 days in a shelter thinking the house was going to be destroyed. She has no idea we had it renovated specifically to withstand typhoons. I had stood frozen outside his door, unable to believe what I was hearing. The real estate market is going to boom after this, Derek continued. All these destroyed properties will need to be rebuilt or sold at a loss. My father's company is positioned perfectly to buy up everything. No, of course I'm not worried about Nina finding out. She's so focused on trying to please my mother that she doesn't pay attention to anything else. That's when I learned the entire truth. Derek had married me purely for optics. His family's company had been facing some PR issues around that time, accusations of predatory business practices and taking advantage of disaster victims. Having a stable marriage to a normal girl from a middle-class background had helped rehab his image. The typhoon had been the final piece of their plan. Thomas Chen's company had insider information about the typhoon's projected path and severity. While the public was being told it would be a Category 3 at worst, Derek's family knew it would be Category 4, possibly Category 5. They had spent the previous year secretly upgrading their properties with military-grade weatherproofing and elevation adjustments. And then, when the typhoon hit and destroyed thousands of homes, the Chen family real estate company had swooped in, buying up damaged properties at a fraction of their value and reselling them at huge profits. But to maintain the illusion that they were also victims of the storm, they needed everyone to believe their main family home had been damaged too, which meant I needed to be out of the house during the typhoon, so I couldn't report that it survived perfectly intact. They had kicked me out to protect their scheme. I had confronted Derek about it. He had laughed in my face. "What are you going to do about it?" he had said. "Who's going to believe you? You're nobody, Nina. Just a girl who married above her station and couldn't handle it." I had gone to the authorities, tried to expose the fraud. But the Chen family had connections everywhere, in the police department, in the media, in the local government. My accusations went nowhere. I was dismissed as a bitter ex-wife trying to cause trouble. Derek divorced me a month later, citing my mental instability and paranoid accusations. I got nothing in the settlement because we had signed a prenup that heavily favored him. I lost my job because the company I worked for had business dealings with Chen Real Estate and didn't want to be associated with someone making trouble. I spent the next 3 years struggling to survive, working minimum wage jobs and living in a tiny studio apartment in a bad part of town. The stress and depression took their toll on my health. I developed severe anxiety, stopped eating properly, stopped taking care of myself. I died alone in my apartment at 28, having lost everything to a family that had never cared about me at all. But now I was back, and this time I knew their plan. More importantly, I knew something they didn't. The typhoon's actual projected path had been revised in the weeks leading up to the storm. The new models showed it would hit 20 miles north of the original prediction, 20 miles north of Qingdao, right where the Chen family had purchased a massive plot of land 6 months earlier, planning to develop it into luxury condos after the storm passed and property values dropped. They had invested nearly everything into that development, believing it would be far enough from the typhoon's path to remain undamaged while nearby properties were destroyed. They were wrong. The revised models showed that the northern path would bring the typhoon directly over their development site. The land they'd purchased was in a low-lying area prone to flooding. The luxury condos they'd already begun constructing would be completely destroyed. And because they'd invested so heavily in weatherproofing their existing properties in Qingdao, including the family mansion, they had almost no liquidity left to absorb the loss. In my first life, I hadn't known about any of this. I had been too focused on survival to pay attention to the Chen family's business dealings. But this time, armed with knowledge of what was coming, I had spent the past 6 months preparing. I had a new job lined up at a competitor company, one that would start right after the typhoon. I had transferred all my personal savings to an account Derek didn't know about. I had documented every insult, every instance of emotional abuse, every piece of evidence of Derek's infidelity that I could find. And most importantly, I had made copies of all the documents I could access that showed the Chen family's insider knowledge of the original typhoon prediction and their subsequent property purchases. As I drove through the storm toward the hotel where I'd booked a room on high ground far from the flood zones, I called my lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Liu, who specialized in cases against wealthy families. "Patricia, it's Nina. I'm ready to file." "Are you sure about this?" Patricia asked. "Once we start this, there's no going back." "I'm sure. I want the divorce papers filed tomorrow morning, and I want to use everything we've documented about his infidelity and his family's emotional abuse. The prenup can be challenged on grounds of fraud and duress. Derek told me the prenup was standard procedure and that his lawyer would explain everything, but he never provided me with independent legal counsel. That alone might be enough. It's risky, I know, but I'm done playing it safe." After I hung up with Patricia, I called my best friend from college, Sophie Zhang, who worked as an investigative journalist for a major newspaper. "Sophie, remember how I told you about Derek's family's business practices? The disaster, profiteering you suspected but couldn't prove? I can prove it now, or at least I will be able to in about 48 hours. How would you like an exclusive?" Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Nina, if you're wrong about this..." "I'm not wrong. Trust me." "Okay, I'm listening." I spent the next hour on the phone with Sophie, laying out everything I knew about the Chen family's scheme, the documents I had copied, and most importantly, what was about to happen to their Northern Development Project. "How do you know the typhoon's going to hit there?" Sophie asked. "Because I've been monitoring the revised weather models that the government hasn't made public yet," I said, which was technically true. In my first life, those models had been released 3 days after the storm, showing that the actual path had been 20 miles north of the original prediction. This time, I was simply ahead of the curve. My source at the meteorological office sent me the latest projections. Another lie, but a necessary one. I couldn't exactly tell her I had lived through this before. "If you're right about this, Nina, it's huge. The Chen family would lose millions." "Tens of millions," I corrected. "Maybe more." "And you're sure they don't know?" "I'm positive. They're so confident in their original intelligence that they haven't bothered to check for updates. They think they're ahead of everyone else. This is incredible. But Nina, you know they're going to come after you hard when this story breaks. Let them try. I have nothing left to lose." That wasn't entirely true. I had my freedom, my self-respect, and my future. But those were things the Chen family had tried to take from me once before, and I wasn't going to let them succeed again. The hotel room I'd booked was small but clean, located on the 8th floor of a building that had been constructed to the highest typhoon safety standards. As I watched the storm intensify outside my window, I felt a calm I hadn't experienced in years. In my previous life, I had spent this storm terrified and alone, wondering if I would survive. This time, I was safe, prepared, and ready to watch the Chen family's empire crumble. My phone rang. It was Derek. "Nina, where the hell are you?" he demanded. "In a hotel, safe from the storm." "You need to come back here right now." "Why?" "So you can throw me out again?" My mother was upset. She didn't mean it. "Come home." I almost laughed. "Derek, you stood there and watched her throw me out in a typhoon. You didn't say one word to stop her. Why would I come back?" "Because you're my wife." "For now. That's about to change." There was a pause. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you should check your email. My lawyer sent you something." I hung up before he could respond. Within minutes, my phone was ringing again. Derek, his mother, his father, all calling simultaneously. I sent them all to voicemail and turned off my phone. For the first time in 3 years, I slept peacefully. The typhoon made landfall around 2 a.m. From my hotel room, I could hear the wind howling and the rain hammering against the windows. I thought about the Chen family. Safe in their weatherproofed mansion, probably drinking wine and congratulating themselves on their clever planning. I wondered how long it would take them to realize something was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to a city transformed. The typhoon had passed, leaving destruction in its wake. Trees were down, buildings were damaged, and the streets were flooded in many areas. But my hotel had survived intact, and I was safe. I turned on my phone to find 73 missed calls and over 100 text messages, mostly from Derek and his family. But there were also messages from Sophie. "Nina, you were right. The typhoon hit exactly where you said it would. The Chen family's development site is completely destroyed. Preliminary estimates say the damage is in the tens of millions. I need you to call me ASAP. This is going to be huge." I smiled and dialed Sophie's number. "Nina, oh my God, how did you know?" "I told you. I had access to the revised models. The Chen family's development is gone, completely wiped out. The main structure collapsed, and the entire site is under 3 feet of water. They're ruined." "What about their other properties?" "That's the interesting part. Their mansion in Qingdao? Barely touched. Same with their other holdings in the original projected path. It's almost like they knew the typhoon was going to hit somewhere else and only protected the properties in the original path." "Interesting," I said neutrally. "Nina, I need those documents you mentioned. Can you get them to me?" "I'll send them over this afternoon, but Sophie, you need to move fast on this. The Chen family has connections everywhere. If they get wind that you're investigating them, they'll shut it down. Don't worry. My editor is already on board. We're running the story tomorrow." After I hung up with Sophie, I checked the news. The typhoon had indeed followed the revised path, devastating the northern suburbs where the Chen development was located. Early estimates suggested it was one of the most expensive disasters in the region's history. The Chen family's gamble had backfired spectacularly. My phone rang again. This time it was Derek, and I decided to answer. "Nina, we need to talk," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "About the divorce. My lawyer already sent you the papers." "Forget the damn divorce. Did you know about the typhoon path?" "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb with me. The storm hit 20 miles north of where it was supposed to. Our development site is destroyed. Did you know?" "How would I know something like that, Derek? I'm just a nobody, remember? A girl who married above her station?" "Nina." "I have to go. I'm meeting with my lawyer this afternoon to discuss the divorce settlement. I'm challenging the prenup, by the way. Fraud and duress. I think I have a good case, don't you?" I hung up and blocked his number. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. Sophie's article came out the following day, detailing the Chen family's suspicious property purchases in the months leading up to the typhoon, their insider knowledge of the original storm path, and their subsequent financial losses when the storm followed a different trajectory. The article didn't directly accuse them of illegal activity. Sophie was too smart for that, but it raised enough questions that other media outlets picked up the story. Within days, investigators from the Securities Commission and the Anti-Corruption Bureau were looking into Chen Real Estate's business practices. My divorce case became a sideshow to the main scandal, but it was still significant. Patricia Liu, my lawyer, had built a compelling case that the prenup was invalid, and with the Chen family now under investigation for potentially criminal activity, Derek's lawyers were motivated to settle quickly and quietly. I didn't get everything I wanted, but I got enough, a fair division of marital assets that left me financially stable, and most importantly, my freedom. But the real satisfaction came from watching the Chen family empire crumble. Thomas Chen was forced to step down as CEO of Chen Real Estate after it was revealed that he had used insider information to make strategic property investments ahead of the typhoon. Margaret Chen's social standing evaporated as her friends and peers distanced themselves from the scandal. Vivian lost her job at a prestigious fashion magazine when the company decided they couldn't afford to be associated with the Chen name. And Derek? Derek lost everything. The company collapsed. The family fortune evaporated, and he was left scrambling to find work while facing potential criminal charges for his role in the scheme. I watched it all unfold with a sense of deep satisfaction, but also with a strange feeling of emptiness. In my first life, I had loved Derek despite everything. I had believed in him, in us, in the possibility of building something real together. Now I knew that had all been an illusion. Derek had never loved me. I had been a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was settling into my new life. I had been promoted twice at my new company and was now heading up my own marketing team. I had moved into a beautiful apartment with a view of the harbor. I had reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. I was happy in a way I had never been with Derek. One evening, I was having dinner with Sophie when she brought up something that had been bothering her. "Nina, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you really know about the typhoon path? And don't give me that story about a source at the meteorological office. I checked. The revised models weren't distributed until after the storm hit." I took a sip of wine, considering how much to tell her. "Let's just say I had a very good feeling about it," I said finally. Sophie studied my face. "You know what I think? I think you somehow knew exactly what was going to happen because you'd seen it before, like you'd lived through it already." I felt my heart skip a beat. That's impossible. "I know, but the way you predicted everything, not just the storm path, but the Chen family's investments, their weatherproofing scheme, even the exact timing of when to file for divorce. It's like you had a playbook. Maybe I'm just very observant. Or maybe you're something more than that." Sophie smiled. "But either way, I'm glad you got out of that marriage. You deserve better than Derek Chen." "I know I do." As I walked home that night, I thought about Sophie's words. She was right. I had been given an impossible advantage, a chance to relive 6 months of my life with full knowledge of what was coming. But more than that, I had been given the chance to choose differently, to choose myself over a love that had never been real, to choose freedom over security, to choose truth over comfortable lies. The typhoon had destroyed the Chen family's empire, but it had set me free. A year after the divorce, I ran into Derek at a coffee shop in downtown Qingdao. He looked terrible, thin, tired, older than his 32 years. He was wearing an off-the-rack suit that probably cost a tenth of what his old designer wardrobe had been worth. "Nina," he said, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I live nearby," I said neutrally. "You look good, really good." "Thank you." There was an awkward silence. "I heard you got promoted again," Derek said. "Director of marketing now, right?" "That's right." "Congratulations, you always were brilliant at your job." I didn't respond to that. "Nina, Derek paused, seeming to struggle with what to say. "I know I don't have any right to ask this, but did you know? About the storm? About what was going to happen to our development?" I looked at him directly. "Would it matter if I did? I keep trying to figure out how it all went so wrong, how we lost everything so quickly, and sometimes I wonder if you somehow knew. Derek, you lost everything because you and your family built an empire on fraud and greed. The typhoon just exposed what was already there. So you did know. I knew your family was corrupt. I knew you never loved me. I knew you married me for appearances and kept me around because I was useful. That was enough." Derek's face crumpled. "I did care about you, Nina. Maybe not in the way I should have, but I did care." "That's not love, Derek. That's convenience. And I'm done being convenient for anyone." I turned to leave, but Derek grabbed my arm. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time since I'd known him, he sounded genuine. "I'm sorry for everything I did to you. You deserved so much better." "I know," I said, gently removing his hand from my arm. "That's why I left." As I walked away from Derek Chen for the final time, I felt the last chains of my past life fall away. I had been given a second chance, and I had used it to build something real, a life based on my own choices, my own values, my own strength. The typhoon had destroyed the Chen family, but it had been the storm that set me free, and I was never going back to that prison again. 3 years after my rebirth, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse apartment, looking out over the Qingdao harbor. In my hand was a glass of champagne, and beside me was Sophie, who had become not just my best friend, but my business partner. After exposing the Chen family scandal, Sophie had won several journalism awards and had parlayed that success into starting her own investigative media company. I had left my corporate marketing job to become her partner, and together we had built a platform dedicated to exposing corruption and holding powerful people accountable. To 3 years of freedom, Sophie said, raising her glass. To second chances, I replied, clinking my glass against hers. Down below, the city lights sparkled like stars. Somewhere out there, Derek Chen was probably still trying to rebuild his life from the ashes of his family's empire. His mother had moved to Beijing to live with relatives. His father was facing criminal charges. His sister had married a middle manager in a tech company and was living a decidedly ordinary life. They had all fallen from their pedestals, brought low by their own greed and the perfect storm, literally and figuratively, that had exposed their corruption. But I didn't spend much time thinking about them anymore. They were part of a past life, a version of myself that no longer existed. I had been reborn, not just in time, but in spirit. The girl who had begged to be let back into that house during the typhoon was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who demanded respect, who built her own empire rather than trying to marry into someone else's. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed?" Sophie asked, reading my mind. "Sometimes," I admitted. "In another life, maybe I would have fought to make that marriage work. I would have believed Derek when he said he cared. I would have spent years trying to win his family's approval. And I would have wasted my life on people who were never going to value me. The typhoon showed me that sometimes the greatest disaster is the one that wakes you up to the truth." Sophie smiled. "That's very profound. You should write that down." "Maybe I will." We stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city below. "You know what the best part is?" I said finally. "What's that?" "They thought throwing me out during the typhoon was the worst thing they could do to me. They thought it would break me, but instead it saved me. Because if I'd stayed in that house, stayed in that marriage, I would have been trapped in their lies forever. So, in a way, they did you a favor. The biggest favor of my life." As the night deepened and the city below continued its endless motion, I thought about the strange mathematics of second chances. In my first life, the typhoon had taken everything from me. In my second life, it had given me everything back, and more. I had lost a husband who never loved me, a family that never accepted me, a life that was never really mine, but I had gained myself. And that was worth more than all the Chen family's money could ever buy. The typhoon had come and gone, destroying the empire built on lies while leaving the truth standing strong. And I, Nina Zhao, had survived both the storm and the marriage that had tried to break me. I was free. I was strong. I was exactly who I was meant to be. And that made every moment of rain, every second of fear, every instance of pain absolutely worth it. The storm had set me free, and I was never going back to that prison again. 4 years after my rebirth, I received an invitation that made me pause. The Qingdao Chamber of Commerce was hosting their annual Business Awards ceremony, and I had been nominated for Young Entrepreneur of the Year for the media company Sophie and I had built. The ceremony was being held at the Grand Qingdao Hotel, the same venue where Derek and I had gotten married 5 years earlier. "You don't have to go," Sophie said when I showed her the invitation. "We can send someone else to accept if you win." "No," I said slowly. "I think I should go. I want to go." "Are you sure? Derek's family used to be major sponsors of this event. They might be there." "They won't be," I said confidently. "The Chen family lost their Chamber of Commerce membership when the fraud investigation started. They're not welcome anymore." Still, as I got dressed for the event, a stunning navy gown that cost more than my entire wardrobe had during my marriage, I felt a flutter of anxiety, not because I might see Derek or his family, but because of what this moment represented. 5 years ago, I had walked into this hotel as Derek Chen's bride, believing I was beginning the happiest chapter of my life. I had been so naive, so hopeful, so certain that love would be enough. Now I was returning as Nina Zhao, successful entrepreneur, investigative journalist, and woman who had rebuilt her life from nothing. The transformation was complete. The ceremony was elegant and well attended. I recognized many faces from my previous life, business associates of the Chen family, socialites who had once looked down on me, corporate executives who had dismissed me as just Derek's wife. They looked at me differently now, with respect, with interest, with the acknowledgement that I was someone worth knowing in my own right. When they announced the nominees for Young Entrepreneur of the Year, I felt Sophie squeeze my hand, and when they called my name as the winner, the applause that filled the room felt like vindication. I walked up to accept my award, and as I looked out over the crowd, I thought about the girl I had been 5 years ago. She would have been terrified to speak in front of these people. She would have deferred to Derek, downplayed her own accomplishments, made herself small to make him comfortable. But that girl was gone. "Thank you," I said into the microphone, my voice steady and clear. "This award is deeply meaningful to me, not just because of the work it represents, but because of the journey it took to get here." I paused, gathering my thoughts. 5 years ago, I stood in this very room for my wedding. I thought I knew what success looked like: a good marriage, a comfortable life, acceptance from my husband's family. I was willing to make myself smaller, quieter, less ambitious to achieve those things. The room was absolutely silent now. And then a typhoon came through and destroyed everything I thought I wanted. At the time, it felt like the worst thing that could have happened. But looking back now, I realized that storm was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to rebuild from nothing, and in doing so, I discovered who I really was. I held up the award. This isn't just recognition for a successful business. This is proof that sometimes the worst storms lead to the clearest skies, that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself, and that the only approval you ever really need is your own. The applause that followed was thunderous. After the ceremony, several people approached me to offer congratulations and discuss potential business opportunities. It was surreal to be sought after by the same people who had once dismissed me as insignificant. "Nina Zhao," a familiar voice said behind me. I turned to find Thomas Chen, Derek's father, looking significantly older and more worn than the last time I'd seen him. His signature confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Mr. Chen," I said neutrally, "I wanted to congratulate you on your award. Well deserved." "Thank you." There was an awkward pause. "I also wanted to apologize," Thomas said quietly, "for how my family treated you. You deserved better." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but all I saw was a tired old man who had lost everything. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I've had a lot of time to think about where things went wrong, about the choices we made, the people we hurt, and I realize now that you were never the problem, Nina." "We were." "I know," I said simply. Thomas looked surprised at my response. "I don't need your apology, Mr. Chen. I stopped needing anything from your family a long time ago. But I appreciate the sentiment." "Derek asks about you sometimes," Thomas said. wonders how you're doing. And what do you tell him? That you're doing better than all of us combined. I smiled at that. That's probably true. As I walked away from Thomas Chen, I felt the final piece of my past fall away. I had been angry for so long, angry at Derek, at his family, at the situation they had put me in. But that anger had transformed over time into something more productive. Determination to build something better, to be someone better, to prove that their rejection of me was the biggest mistake they ever made, and I had succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. The girl who had been thrown out during the typhoon was gone. In her place was a woman who had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, wiser, and absolutely unstoppable. 5 years after my rebirth, on the anniversary of the typhoon that had changed everything, I stood on the beach in Qingdao watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the ocean was calm and peaceful. It was hard to believe that 5 years ago, this same ocean had been churning with deadly waves, that this same sky had been dark with storm clouds, that this same beach had been battered by winds that destroyed everything in their path. But nature had recovered. The beaches had been rebuilt, the damaged buildings repaired or replaced, the scars of the storm slowly healing over time, just like me. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Turn on Channel 7. You're going to want to see this." I pulled out my phone and opened the live stream. It was a news report about Chen Real Estate's final bankruptcy proceedings. The company that had once been worth hundreds of millions was being dissolved, its remaining assets sold off to pay creditors. The reporter was standing in front of the Chen family mansion, the one that had survived the typhoon perfectly intact thanks to their illegal inside information. This property, which became a symbol of the Chen family's corruption scandal, is being auctioned off today, the reporter said. Bidding started at 5 million yuan, well below its estimated value, as buyers remain wary of the property's notorious history. I watched with interest as the camera panned across the mansion. It looked smaller than I remembered, less impressive. Just a building, not the fortress I had once thought it was. And in a final ironic twist, the reporter continued, the winning bid came from Zhao Media Group, the investigative journalism company founded by Nina Zhao, the ex-wife of Derek Chen who helped expose the family's corruption in the aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan. I smiled. Sophie had been busy. My phone rang immediately. "Did you just buy the Chen family mansion?" I asked without preamble. "I did," Sophie said excitedly. "And guess what we're going to do with it?" "Tell me." "We're going to turn it into a resource center for typhoon victims and disaster survivors. Free legal aid, financial counseling, mental health services, everything people need to rebuild their lives after a disaster." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "Sophie, that's perfect. I thought you'd like it. The symbolism is pretty great, right? The house that survived the storm because of corruption is now going to help people who lost everything. When can we start renovations?" "Next month. And Nina, I want to name it after you, the Nina Zhao Recovery Center." "Absolutely not. Name it after the survivors. Call it the Haiyan Hope Center." "Haiyan Hope," Sophie repeated. "I love it. You know what, Nina? You could have bought that house yourself. You have the money now." "Why didn't you?" I thought about that for a moment, watching the waves roll in and out on the beach. "Because it was never about getting revenge on them," I said finally. "It was about getting free from them. Buying that house would have been about the past. The recovery center is about the future." "When did you get so wise?" "Around the time I stopped caring what the Chen family thought of me." We talked for a few more minutes about the logistics of the recovery center, and then I hung up and turned back to the ocean. The sun was almost completely set now, the last rays of golden light dancing across the water. A memory surfaced. Standing in the rain outside that mansion 5 years ago, my suitcase at my feet, water streaming down my face, I had felt so small in that moment, so powerless and alone. If I could go back and tell that version of myself what was coming, the success, the freedom, the absolute triumph over everyone who had tried to break me, would she have believed it? Probably not. That Nina had been beaten down by years of emotional abuse, convinced she was worthless without Derek and his family's approval. But she had survived, and from her ashes, I had risen. 6 months later, the Hyon Hope Center officially opened. The media coverage was extensive, not just because of the connection to the Chen family scandal, but because it represented something larger: hope, redemption, and the power of turning tragedy into purpose. I stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony with Sophie, surrounded by disaster survivors, community leaders, and volunteers who would staff the center. Derek's old mansion had been completely transformed. The ostentatious decorations were gone, replaced with warm, welcoming spaces designed to make vulnerable people feel safe and supported. This center represents what this city is really about, the mayor said during her speech. Not the greed and corruption that the Chen family represented, but the resilience and compassion of our community. We take care of our own, especially when disaster strikes. After the ceremony, I was approached by a young woman who looked to be in her early 20s. "Ms. Zhao," she said nervously, "I'm Lin Wei. I survived the typhoon 5 years ago. I lost my home, my job, everything. I spent months in shelters trying to rebuild." "I'm so sorry you went through that," I said gently. "I just wanted to say thank you, not just for this center, but for exposing what the Chen family did, for making sure people like me weren't forgotten in their greed." Her eyes filled with tears. "You didn't have to do any of this. You could have just moved on with your life, but you chose to fight for people you don't even know." I took her hand and squeezed it. "I know exactly what you went through. Maybe not in the same way, but I understand what it feels like to lose everything and have to rebuild from nothing." "Really?" "Really. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we're stronger than we think. We survive. We adapt. We rebuild. And sometimes we build something even better than what we lost." Lin Wei smiled through her tears. "Can I volunteer here? I want to help other survivors." "We'd love to have you." As Lin Wei walked away to fill out volunteer paperwork, Sophie came up beside me. "You know what I just realized?" she said. "What's that?" 5 years ago, you were thrown out of that house during the worst storm this city has ever seen. Today, you're the reason that same house is going to help thousands of people rebuild their lives. That's not just poetic justice. That's legendary." I laughed. "I don't know about legendary." "I do. Nina, you turned the worst thing that ever happened to you into something that's going to help so many people. That's not just survival. That's transformation." That night, as I drove home from the center, I took a detour past the shelter where I had spent 3 terrifying days during the typhoon in my first life. It was still there, a squat concrete building that had provided refuge to thousands of people over the years. In my first life, I had been one of them, scared, alone, betrayed. I had huddled in a corner with strangers, listening to the storm rage outside and wondering if the building would hold. I had cried myself to sleep on a thin mat, wearing borrowed clothes because mine had been soaked through. I had felt like the lowest point of my life, but looking back now, I realized it had actually been the turning point, because in that shelter, surrounded by people who had also lost everything, I had learned something important: material possessions, social status, family connections. They could all be stripped away in an instant. The only thing that truly mattered was who you were when everything else was gone. And I had discovered that at my core, stripped of Derek's last name and his family's money and the identity I had built as his wife, I was strong enough to survive anything. 7 years after my rebirth, I was invited to give a TED Talk about resilience and rebuilding after disaster, both natural and personal. The invitation came with a note. Your story of surviving both a typhoon and a toxic marriage has inspired thousands. We'd love for you to share it with a wider audience. I almost declined. Despite all the success and the healing, there was still a part of me that felt uncomfortable broadcasting the most painful period of my life to millions of strangers. But then I thought about Lin Wei and the hundreds of other survivors who had reached out to me over the years, telling me that my story had given them hope. I thought about the women who had contacted me about leaving their own toxic marriages, saying that knowing I had survived and thrived gave them courage to do the same. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who needed to hear that second chances were possible, that rock bottom wasn't the end, that the storm always passes. So I accepted. Standing on that TED stage, looking out at thousands of people in the audience and millions more who would eventually watch online, I told my story. I told them about the marriage I thought would last forever, the family I tried so hard to please, the moment I was thrown out into a typhoon. I told them about the shelter, the fear, the betrayal, about discovering the truth of my husband's scheme and realizing that everything I had believed about my life was a lie. But I also told them about what came after, about filing for divorce, exposing corruption, building a new life from nothing, about turning the house where I'd been rejected into a center for hope and healing. People often ask me if I'm angry about what happened, I said, if I'm bitter about the years I wasted with Derek and his family, and the truth is I'm not, because those experiences, as painful as they were, taught me something invaluable. I paused, looking around the audience. They taught me that I don't need anyone's approval to be worthy, that I don't need to make myself small to make others comfortable, that love shouldn't require you to give up who you are. And most importantly, they taught me that sometimes the worst storms lead to the clearest skies. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. The night I was thrown out during that typhoon, I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything that mattered, but I was wrong. I hadn't lost anything real. I had only lost the illusion of what I thought I had. And once that illusion was shattered, I was finally free to build something authentic. I smiled, remembering that girl standing in the rain, so certain her world was ending. If I could go back and talk to that version of myself, the one standing outside that mansion soaked and terrified, I would tell her this: you are about to learn how strong you really are. You are about to discover that you don't need anyone to save you because you can save yourself, and you are about to build a life so much better than anything you ever imagined possible. The applause, when I finished, was overwhelming. But more meaningful than the applause were the messages I received afterward, from people all over the world who had survived their own storms and found hope in my story. One message in particular stood out. It was from a woman named Grace Park who wrote, "I was planning to go back to my abusive husband because I didn't think I could make it on my own. But after hearing your talk, I realize I'm stronger than I thought. Thank you for showing me that survival isn't just possible. It's the beginning of something better." I read that message 3 times, tears streaming down my face. This was why I had told my story. This was why the pain had been worth it. 8 years after my rebirth, I was invited to serve on a government task force developing new regulations for disaster preparedness and rebuilding. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same authorities who had ignored my complaints about the Chen family's corruption were now asking for my expertise. But I accepted, because the work was important and because I had learned that holding grudges only limited your own potential for impact. During one of our meetings, a junior aide pulled me aside. "Ms. Zhao, there's someone here who'd like to speak with you. He says he's your ex-husband." My stomach clenched. I hadn't seen Derek in over 5 years. "Where is he?" "In the visitor's lounge." I took a deep breath and walked to the lounge, preparing myself for, I wasn't sure what. Derek was sitting by the window looking out at the harbor. He had aged. There were lines on his face that hadn't been there before, gray in his hair. He looked like a man who had been through something difficult and come out the other side changed. "Derek," I said. He turned and stood up quickly. "Nina, thank you for seeing me." "What do you want?" "To apologize. Properly this time, without excuses or justifications. I was a terrible husband. I used you. I lied to you, and I let my family treat you horribly. And then, when everything fell apart, I blamed you for it. I'm sorry." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, but all I saw was genuine remorse. "Why now?" I asked. "Why after all these years?" "Because I've spent the last 8 years learning how to be a decent human being," Derek said. "I lost everything. My family's money, my reputation, my sense of identity. I had to rebuild from nothing, and in doing that, I finally understood what I put you through." "You didn't have to rebuild from nothing," I pointed out. "You had your education, your connections, your privilege. I had none of those things." "You're right, and that makes what you accomplished even more remarkable." Derek smiled sadly. "I've followed your career, Nina. The media company, the recovery center, the advocacy work. You've done incredible things." "I did what I had to do to survive." "No, you did more than survive. You thrived. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into something that helps thousands of people. That's not just survival. That's heroism." I didn't know what to say to that. "I'm not here to ask for anything," Derek continued. "Not forgiveness, not friendship, nothing. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did to you, and I understand why you did what you did. And I'm grateful that you exposed my family's corruption, because if you hadn't, I would have become exactly like my father, greedy, corrupt, and empty." "What are you doing now?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I teach business ethics at a community college. The irony isn't lost on me." Derek laughed without humor. "I make barely enough to get by. I live in a small apartment, and I'll probably never have the kind of success I once took for granted. But I'm happy in a way I never was before. I'm doing work that matters, helping students avoid the mistakes I made." "That's good," I said and meant it. "Nina, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you ever think about what our life could have been like if I hadn't been such an idiot? If I had actually loved you the way you deserved?" I thought about that for a moment. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But then I realized that if you had been different, I would be different too. I would probably still be that girl who was willing to make herself small to make others comfortable. I wouldn't have built the company or the recovery center or any of the things I'm proud of now." "So, in a way, I did you a favor?" "In a way you did, though I wouldn't recommend your methods to anyone." Derek laughed, a real laugh this time. "Fair enough." We talked for a few more minutes, and then Derek stood to leave. "Thank you for seeing me, Nina, and congratulations on everything you've accomplished. You deserve all of it." As I watched him walk away, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't known I needed. Derek wasn't the villain of my story anymore. He was just a flawed man who had made terrible choices and was now trying to be better. I could live with that. 10 years after my rebirth, on the anniversary of Typhoon Haiyan, I stood at the opening ceremony of the 5th Haiyan Hope Center. We had expanded beyond Qingdao, opening recovery centers in cities across the country that were vulnerable to natural disasters. The original center in the Chen family mansion had helped over 10,000 people. Thousands more had been served by our other locations. We had provided free legal aid, financial counseling, job training, and mental health services to disaster survivors who had nowhere else to turn. Sophie stood beside me, both of us older and wiser than the women who had started this journey together. 10 years, she said. Can you believe it's been 10 years? Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Which version of yourself do you miss most? The naive newlywed or the woman who was thrown out in the storm? Neither, I said. I don't miss who I was. I'm grateful for who I've become. After the ceremony, I drove to the beach where I had stood 5 years earlier, watching the sunset and marveling at how far I had come. The ocean was calm today, the sky clear and blue. I pulled out my phone and looked at a photo from 10 years ago, my wedding day. I was standing next to Derek, smiling at the camera, looking so happy and hopeful, so certain that I knew what the future held. That girl had no idea what was coming. The betrayal, the storm, the devastating discovery of her husband's true nature, the divorce, the struggle, the years of rebuilding. But she also had no idea about the strength she would discover in herself, the empire she would build, the thousands of lives she would touch, the woman she would become. I deleted the photo. I didn't need it anymore. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. Emergency board meeting tomorrow. We've been offered a major grant to expand internationally. This is huge. I smiled. There was always another challenge, another opportunity, another storm to weather. But I had learned something over the past 10 years. I was built to survive storms. More than that, I was built to thrive in their aftermath. The typhoon that was supposed to destroy me had instead forged me into something unbreakable. That night, I had a dream. I was back in front of the Chen family mansion, standing in the pouring rain with my suitcase at my feet. But this time, when the door slammed shut, I didn't cry. Instead, I picked up my suitcase, turned around, and walked away with my head held high. Behind me, I could hear the storm raging against the house. I knew what was coming. The northern development would be destroyed. The family's empire would crumble. Everything they had built on lies would come crashing down. But I was walking toward something better, toward freedom, toward truth, toward a future I would build with my own hands. In the dream, I looked back one last time at the mansion, and as I watched, the house began to transform. The walls became transparent, revealing the recovery center inside, people helping each other, survivors supporting survivors, hope blooming where corruption had once thrived. And I understood this was the real victory, not revenge, not vindication, not even justice. Though all of those had their place, the real victory was transformation, taking something broken and making it beautiful, taking something meant to destroy you and using it to build something that heals others. I woke up with tears on my face and a smile on my lips. 15 years after my rebirth, I received an invitation to speak at Derek and my old high school. They were doing a career day, and they wanted me to talk to students about resilience and entrepreneurship. I almost declined. I had put that part of my past behind me, and I didn't see the point in dredging it up. But then I thought about all the young women who might be in that audience, maybe dating someone who didn't treat them well, maybe sacrificing their dreams for someone else's approval. If I could reach even one of them, it would be worth it. The auditorium was packed with students, and I could see my younger self in so many of their faces, hopeful, uncertain, trying to figure out who they wanted to become. I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you, I began. The worst thing that ever happened to me was also the best thing that ever happened to me. I told them about the marriage, the betrayal, the typhoon. I told them about being thrown out into the storm and thinking my life was over. But I also told them about what came after, about building a company from nothing, about turning a house of corruption into a center for healing, about discovering strength they didn't know they had. The lesson isn't that you should seek out terrible experiences, I said. The lesson is that when terrible things happen, and they will, because life is unpredictable and storms come when you least expect them, you have two choices. You can let those experiences destroy you, or you can let them forge you into something stronger. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Ms. Zhao, If you could go back and change what happened, would you? It was a question I had asked myself countless times over the years. No, I said, and realized I meant it completely, because changing what happened would mean changing who I became. And I like who I am now. I'm proud of what I've built, proud of the people I've helped, proud of the woman I fought to become. But wasn't it hard? Another student asked. Weren't you scared? Terrified, I admitted. There were nights when I didn't know if I could keep going, when the weight of everything seemed too much to bear, but I kept going anyway because the only way out was through. After the talk, several students came up to speak with me. One young woman in particular caught my attention. She reminded me so much of my younger self that it was almost painful. Ms. Zhao, she said quietly, I'm in a relationship with someone who doesn't always treat me well. He says he loves me, but he also puts me down and makes me feel like I'm not good enough. Your talk made me realize that I don't have to accept that I deserve better. I took her hand and squeezed it. You absolutely deserve better. Love should build you up, not tear you down. It should make you feel stronger, not weaker. And if someone truly loves you, they'll want you to succeed, not hold you back. Thank you, she whispered. I think I know what I need to do now. As I watched her walk away, I felt a profound sense of purpose. This was why I had survived. This was why the storm had come, not to destroy me, but to prepare me to help others weather their own storms. 20 years after my rebirth, I published a memoir titled After the Storm: Finding Strength in Survival. The book detailed my journey from that night outside the mansion to the woman I had become, the successes, the failures, the lessons learned along the way. The book became a bestseller, translated into 30 languages, and reached millions of people around the world. I received letters from readers on every continent telling me how my story had helped them survive their own storms. One letter in particular moved me to tears. It was from a woman named Sarah Martinez in California who wrote, I was trapped in an abusive marriage for 15 years. I thought I had no choice but to stay, that I couldn't survive on my own. Then I read your book. Your story showed me that not only could I survive, I could thrive. I left my husband 3 months ago. I'm working 2 jobs and living in a small apartment, but I'm free, and I'm building a life that's mine. Thank you for showing me that was possible. I framed that letter and hung it in my office. It was a reminder of why the pain had been worth it, why surviving was just the beginning, why telling my story mattered. 25 years after my rebirth, on the anniversary of the typhoon, I stood once again at the beach in Qingdao. I was 52 years old now, with silver streaking through my hair and lines on my face that told the story of a life fully lived. The Haiyan Hope Centers had expanded to 15 locations across Asia. We had helped over 100,000 people rebuild their lives after disasters. Sophie and I had built our media company into one of the most respected investigative journalism operations in the region. But more than any of that, I had built a life I was proud of, a life based on truth, on purpose, on the hard-won knowledge that I was enough all by myself. I thought about the girl who had stood in the rain outside the Chen mansion 25 years ago, believing her world was ending. I wished I could go back and tell her what I knew now, that the ending of one story was just the beginning of another, better one. My phone rang. It was Sophie. Nina, you're going to want to sit down for this. What's happened? Remember Lin Wei, the young woman who was one of our first volunteers at the recovery center? Of course. She's running our Beijing location now. Well, she just called. She's been nominated for Humanitarian of the Year by the United Nations, and in her nomination speech, she credited you with inspiring her to dedicate her life to helping disaster survivors. I felt tears spring to my eyes. That's incredible. She wants you to be there when she accepts the award. Will you go? Absolutely. After I hung up, I stood on the beach watching the waves roll in and out, just as they had for millions of years before me, and would for millions of years after I was gone. The typhoon had come and gone. The Chen family empire had risen and fallen. Derek had learned his lessons, found his redemption in a small life teaching ethics to community college students, and I had transformed from a frightened girl thrown out into a storm into a woman who had weathered every challenge life threw at her and emerged victorious. The storm had not destroyed me. It had revealed me, and that made all the difference. As the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I thought about the question that young student had asked me years ago. If you could go back and change what happened, would you? My answer was still no, because every moment of pain, every instance of betrayal, every second of fear had been necessary to forge me into the woman I had become, the woman who had built an empire from ashes. The woman who had turned a house of corruption into a beacon of hope. The woman who had proven that sometimes the worst storms lead to the clearest skies. I was Nina Zhao. I had survived a typhoon, a toxic marriage, and my own self-doubt. And I had done more than survive. I had thrived. The storm was long past, but its lessons remained. And I would spend the rest of my life using those lessons to help others weather their own storms, find their own strength, and build their own better futures. Because that's what survivors do. We don't just endure, we transform. We don't just rebuild, we reimagine. We don't just survive, we teach others how to thrive. The typhoon had set me free, and I had used that freedom to build something beautiful. And that was the greatest victory of all.